To say about the budget in terms of your overall focus and any specific items you'd like to call out?
Put India on a growth trajectory that will get us to the intended $5 trillion mark, and which will also help us double farmers' incomes by 2022. That's really, if I were to summarize it, that's what this budget intends to do. And it contains a number of very specific action points in that direction. The Finance Minister outlined 16 steps in the area of agriculture. She also referred to the National Infrastructure Pipeline, which has 6,500 very specific infrastructure projects that have been identified. They are at different stages of development, but an investor wanting to come into India, or an Indian investor wanting to invest in infrastructure, would not have to look to identify a project, but would instead choose from this pre-selected list of 6,500. And the funding of that is a mix of central, state and private money, along with borrowing, of course. But a start has been made by making a provision this year to create a corpus for that national infrastructure pipeline. These are just some of the highlights.
And you spoke about the central sector schemes, centrally sponsored schemes also, which roughly make up about 22% of expenditure, since you're the Secretary Expenditure. Sir, what about subsidies, which make up 6% of expenditure? Is there a move now to reduce subsidy or also to increase subsidy, because that may be the demand of the public?
Part or an inherent intended part of a scheme that we will provide for fully. But where there are leakages, misuses of subsidies, we have been curtailing that, particularly through the use of Aadhaar and direct benefit transfer. We've had very good results in terms of being able to see that the deserving continue to get the subsidy, but those who have been basically pilfering public funds in the name of subsidies are eliminated. So that has been the strategy, and provisions have been made for the subsidies where due. But schemes are being tightened in terms of ensuring that subsidies reach, and the Finance Minister also made a reference to the quotation about only 15 paise reaching. Well, that has changed, and the increased focus is to see that the subsidy that we provide actually reaches the targeted beneficiary. If we ensure that, then there is, to some extent, there are changes in the necessary provisions, but sometimes the subsidy also goes up for inherent economic reasons. So we've made adequate provisions for whatever is genuinely required.
एजेंसी है वो आप इस बजट में काफ़ी दिख रहा है कि पीपीपी का काफ़ी यूज़ हो रहा है, तो उसके बारे में आपका कमेंट?
The overall increase in expenditure in the budget is approximately of the order of 11%, but the increase in capital expenditure is more than 22%. So
leveraged.
So if you see the quality of expenditure that is going in, the growth of capital expenditure is double the rate of growth of other expenditure. So the attempt is to basically stimulate growth, and a lot of avenues for private participation are opening up, particularly in the National Infrastructure Pipeline, which is a huge pipeline, 103 lakh crores. And so this budget, as I said, has a lot of provisions which incentivize the private sector to make investments.
What actually impressed me in terms of opening up of FDI in the education sector. Now, for the last 5-7 years or even 10 years or so, there were a lot of international organizations who wanted to open up institutes over here, but the issue came in terms of UGC and AICT, and those roadblocks do came in. So would you be having some sort of a window or somewhere where these institutes can open up, because this has been an important concern about whether we would like to open up the whole zone for the big brands of the global education system. So I would like to have your views on that. What specifically, when we say FDI, would be allowed?
Higher education policy, but the you can see that a certain indication or an initial move in this direction came with the idea of institutions of eminence,
exactly,
including greenfield institutions of eminence. So that's a beginning. This is a way by which we hope that more institutions, higher education institutions in India would expand and become world class. And if they need funds in order to become world class, they would be able to access foreign funding, where it actually would lead to a qualitatively better outcome. But the details of exactly how it will work are yet to be worked out, and the Ministry of HRD, we will collaborate with them on the details of this.
Okay. I also had a small sub coming in investing in infrastructure. I also believe that India and some countries of Asia, Africa for example, because I have been working extensively on the fund side too, the social impact side and all, are you all also considering some tax holidays maybe to be brought in? Because when I was hearing the finance minister's speech, she only mentioned infrastructure and other sectors. So just want to know if there is
I'm not an expert on
The finance minister's speech when she talked about, I think something maybe even the fertilizer.
Fertilizers.
Oh, yes.
So what is it that is the thought process there? And
Yes, they are a great degree to overuse certain other chemical fertilizers to a degree, and it has no incentive for the use of traditional or organic or non-chemical fertilizers. So they are basically intending to rejig the policy on fertilizers. So that, and she also gave a quotation from Avayar, the Tamil saint. So the point is that the fertilizer regime will be restructured such that perverse incentives to overuse certain kinds of fertilizers will be removed. Again, the details will come separately. It's not being announced in the budget and it's being worked on.
land leasing and the abolition of the APML Act. Is there a gentle nudge for the states to then give them enough incentive that they should do it?
Has come up with so-called model acts where the center suggests or encourages the state to adopt it, but they have not traditionally led to adoption by too many states. Some states have, some states have not. This is a situation where, because we are focused on increasing farmers' income, and I just want to take a minute here. There's sometimes a misunderstanding on this issue. The goal is not to double agricultural output. That is not the goal. That is not even feasible. So people sometimes say, "Oh, it can't be done." And of course, it can't be done. But the aim is not to double agricultural output. The aim is to double farmers' income. There's a very big difference between the two. So farmers' incomes go up when their input costs go down. So if they use less chemical fertilizer and find better ways of farming, so their net income goes up. Farmers' income go up when they are able to use their land to sell solar energy to the grid. Farmers' incomes go up when a farmer in, say, the northeast, who could get a much higher price in Calcutta, is able to use a commercial flight, and upload his small quantity of perishables, and is able to reach that market. Or if he's able to put it on a train and reach an urban center where he would get a much better price than he fetches at his farm gate. So the thrust is really on improving incomes. And did I answer the...
Yeah, I think on freight for road and rail and sea, GST was exempt. On air freight, there seems to be a GST, so I think perhaps that has to be addressed. Address that, look forward to, won't really...
Bond issue are we looking at for the government carrying out its expenditure programs?
Some 7 lakh plus crores, which is based on the projected fiscal deficit number. But there is also some borrowing that is outside the bond market, which also we have very clearly indicated in an annexure to the budget speech. So interest payments are, actually interest rates have moderated over the last 24 months, and we hope that with this budget, which has given what I would call a prudent stimulus. It's not a reckless stimulus, it's a very prudent stimulus. So I think we will continue to see some moderation in interest rates, and therefore we will continue to be on a very sustainable path of interest to our total expenditures. And we are on a sustainable path, we will stay on that path.
It's interest payments, it's a liability on the government, while at the same time the buyer of the debt instrument wants a higher rate of interest. So how do you balance the interest of both government and the bond buyer through your policy?
I mean, higher interest rates benefit someone who lends, they affect someone who... The things we are trying to do is, one is, there was a mention in this budget speech about bond ETFs. So often you find that retail investors are unable to get the full benefit of the interest rate which the government pays, because they don't have access to those instruments. It's big market players who can actually subscribe to government bonds. So bond ETFs are one of the ways where a middle class investor who wants a safe instrument can actually directly engage and participate in the government bond market. So
A marketplace for you to directly perhaps place bonds effectively.
It increases the liquidity on the government securities market.
The comments on this?
It will hopefully increase the flow of foreign portfolio investors into this, which The primary aim is really to increase liquidity, which makes it easier then for the bond market to function. And hopefully it will also then trigger a growth in the corporate bond market, which is what we really want to stimulate. Because government bonds, yes, they always get placed. We have no difficulty in operating the government bond market. But we also need to develop the corporate bond market, because otherwise long-term projects have great difficulty getting financing. Hot money is always a concern. You're very right. It's a very pertinent point that you're raising. And that is precisely why this has been capped at 15. So 15 is still, I think, a reasonably prudent number.
I think
Today
by
wasn't a
Monday,
normal
Tuesday,
day in
it was
the
a
markets.
normal day, exactly.
Yeah.
So Monday, Tuesday, it should be much better. Doctor, in respect to the expenditure perspective of, I guess, looking at the economic survey, which is a kind of an intent over a number of years, a direction, and the budget, how do you see the short term and the medium term, long term melding together?
Long term, I must confess. But we do have the medium term framework that is set out along with the annual budget documents in the FRBM framework. So we do provide a certain indication of how we expect it to evolve. It's part of the annexes to the budget documents. There's a fiscal responsibility statement that comes with it. So for the immediate future, we would see expenditure rising at slightly above the rate of growth of nominal GDP. So next year we're projecting a 10% growth in nominal GDP, but the rate of expenditure growth will be faster than that. And that is only on the basis of on-budget expenditures. If you add off-budget expenditures, which we have now listed separately in the speech, then in fact the growth is even more than 11%. But in the long run, what we would look to do is to ensure that expenditure provisions move towards a reduction of unproductive sides of expenditure. So there was also a reference in the speech, if you look at it, is about looking again at some of the old schemes, centrally sponsored and central sector schemes, which may have outlived their usefulness, but there is a certain inertia when a scheme is started, then it seems to continue, because it's easier to continue it than for somebody to go back and say stop it, and there are always some constituents who like the scheme. So we do intend to take a very careful look at existing centrally sponsored and central sector schemes with a view to eliminating or reducing the ones that are not producing value for money in terms of the public expenditure that goes into them. So that's one way that we would continue to keep expenditure growth within available revenue and other receipts, ensure that the fiscal deficit is moderated back to the 3% level over a period of 2 to 3 years, and continue, and of course if we're able to restore growth to higher levels, then expenditure can keep growing at a certain pace without necessarily being fiscally unaffordable. So if as we expect growth rates pick up substantially, we should be able to maintain the pace of expenditure that we need in terms of providing for both the social needs of an emerging economy and for capital expenditure in infrastructure and all of those needs. So there is some thought that has gone into it, but it is in the nature of these things that making predictions for a very long period is astrology more than economics.
The expenditures towards defense. Could you give us your opinion in terms of the pace of expenditure in this particular field when it comes to national security, startups who are entering this field, and the employment that is being generated of skilled labor?
Necessary. I mean, we have not stinted at all on that. So defense expenditures are growing at the pace which is assessed as necessary in the security environment. But within that, the attempt now is to indigenize, so that if more of that expenditure goes into indigenous production, producers, startups, MSMEs, large producers, private, public, then the multiplier effects on the economy are very different from the same amount of defense expenditure going into imports. So the stress now is not so much on the budget number, but on the composition of the expenditure. And so there is this, I think you will shortly be seeing something called the IDEX, which is the India Defense Expo, where again they are looking at creating an environment where startups contribute technology ideas and contribute to improving defense technology through indigenous ideas and materials. There's also there is a reference here to the National Technical Textiles Mission. Now, a lot of the technical textiles we're talking about are actually defense related. So bulletproof vests are an example of technical textiles. There are other technical textiles which are not defense related. So fireproof, wear, which may be used by firemen or by people in fire hazardous industries. But it also has a defense application. So the National Technical Textile Mission also has defense applications. It has other applications too. Currently, India imports a lot of technical textiles. Even though we are a leader in the general textile category, we have a lot to do on the technical textiles category in terms of upgrading technology, quality, etc. So that's a mission that is coming. It has both a GDP and employment dimension, because like all textiles, it is employment intensive. Technical textiles are also employment intensive, though maybe a little more capital intensive than conventional textiles. But they are labor intensive. And then it has this impact on the defense sector, where we do procure a lot of technical textiles.
So that means, the existing amount of money can actually buy much more products. They did it last year for a year, this year actually extended it for another year. So that's a significant amount of money. People tend to underestimate it.
Taxes and duties, which is at 20%. How does the federal state structure accommodate that in such a way that, again, both the center is happy and the state's happy?
It is an interim report. It's for the 1 year, that is for the forthcoming financial year from 2020 to 21. The full report is expected later in the year. In this report, they have reduced, I would use the word adjusted, the state's share of central taxes from 42 to 41. I say adjusted because a state which got approximately 0.85, or I forget the exact figure, of revenue in the old dispensation is J&K, which, because it's now in the union territory category, actually flows through the central budget. Exactly. So in essence, the 42 to 41 is not a substantive change. It is a change that reflects the changing configuration. They've also made some revenue deficit grants for this year. So those are what the Finance Commission has assessed as being necessary. So they have a number of recommendations, but these are the two main ones which the government has accepted.
Government expenditure, and there is a fair degree of litigation trying to readjust and get a higher pension according to whatever guidelines have been issued. What about the dispute resolution so that the government's liability actually comes down?
The exercise, and after each pay commission there are habitually little imbalances that tend to be corrected, and it is usually the correction ends up on the higher side, because it's not possible to take away a vested right. So it's there, but I don't think it is. I think the big lumpy change was OROP. After that, I think the remaining changes are minor. They're not fiscally very significant, but yes, it is a significant part of government expenditure, civil as well as defense pensions. But it's something that I think is where we have very little ability to make any changes in the rates or in the numbers. It is entirely a given. It's almost like interest payments. It's a given. And but if the economy grows and the denominator grows and the budget grows, then it will become a smaller share of the total.
Go for another interview, this time on Doordarshan. So, anything specific you'd like to leave us with, a kind of summing up or whatever?
I think it's a budget that has as its objective putting India on a sustainable high growth path, but at the same time ensuring that India is a caring society. These were the words. The caring society is exactly what and it's also a budget that looks to satisfy the aspirations of a young India, which has the benefit of a very youthful population. So if you look at the kinds of things that are being incentivized and promoted, a lot of references to artificial intelligence, a lot of references to technology, and the references to skilling Indians to take service jobs abroad. So all of this is intended it's an India that will grow fast, will take care of its citizens and provide opportunities.